definitely louder. All right, great. Good to see everybody. So, smaller group today, but I think we can go through some of the items that we had. I posted an agenda, a couple of organizational things for milestone one. Want to talk about any follow-ups from last week's exciting parquet session, talk about Connectathon items, and start from there. Does that sound good to everybody? Anybody have any other agenda items? No? Okay. So just on to old business. So taking a look, I actually apologize. I was quite busy this week and was not able to post the meeting notes in a timely fashion. And plus, they were quite extensive. So I'm going to have to take some time to go through them. I will get to that because I think there's a lot of good information in there, which is what I usually do, but I didn't get a chance to do it this week. So I'm just looking at the 4:30 meeting notes and let's see. So I won't read them all out. Just for folks who are on the call, Igor, I think you have some PRs about boundary function outstanding. So take a look at those. You had an item about exploring constraints on tabular profiles, add collection false, that sort of thing. I don't know where's that at because it's been a couple of weeks.
I finally got a repo through NCQA that's public that I can use, and I put the test results on there. I just need to is the process to fork the main branch into my own thing, update, point to where test results are, and then merge back into SQL on FHIR. Is that an okay way to do it, or?
I think just push a PR. I don't think you need to fork. But
okay.
Well, for pushing PR, depends on which process you pick. I usually fork myself, but yeah.
I think I had to fork in order to do a PR last time I tried. Doesn't matter. I'll see whatever I need to do, but I'll fork.
Yeah, because it depends whether you can push to a branch or not. So not necessarily. Right. I don't know if I have that right as well. But if you do it on your own fork, then we remove that requirement.
Okay, cool. I'll get to that.
Awesome. Yeah, and I guess reach out to Bashir, Nikolai on Zulip if there's any issues. I guess either way works. And I think that's it for old business. John is not here, but just to mention one thing that I'm sorry, Dimitri, go ahead.
Igor not here, so I will tell a little bit about low and high boundary functions. I implemented code to handle data time and time, so it's worked properly and I tested. But to finish these functions, I'm still trying to find out how should work optimal, because in JavaScript there is limitation for number, and I noticed it's like 16 digits in general, like it doesn't matter before point or after. So if consider FHIR spec, we did like minimum problems that FHIR standard might 17 digits before point, and so in this case flow will happen.
Any thoughts on that?
I looked at the explanation because I commented on it. I was running into similar things with RK for a second. Do we know what the JavaScript FHIR path implementation does for the decimal type? I haven't looked at it, but I don't know if anyone else has. Because I think JavaScript just uses a 64-bit float value. I don't know if it has fixed point decimal. For my implementation, I had to have a separate fixed point decimal thing, but I'm not sure what the FHIR JS does.
Any insight into that from the group? I know, Ryan, did you mess around with FHIR before?
But not the JavaScript specific version, so I don't have any particular knowledge about that. I would venture to guess that the FHIR JS just does use the internal JavaScript double, which is technically a bug and isn't compliant with FHIR spec. That all said, it's like I think that it may be acceptable to kind of just use what the FHIR JS gives us and consider that like a known issue, and perhaps look at fixing that within the FHIR JS engine itself. That would make more sense than trying to have like our own implementation of it. Fixing it in FHIR itself is probably a better and broader change there. So for me, I guess it seems reasonable to consider it a known issue, and then we can look at fixing it in FHIR. But again, I have no direct knowledge of the FHIR JS engine.
It's fair. I couldn't remember if you had more knowledge of that. And that sounds like a reasonable approach to me. Mark it as a known issue, and then work with the FHIR JS folks to fix it or have a solution upstream. So does that sound like a reasonable approach to move forward? I'm looking at the number of PRs we have, and there's only one really, and there's two, but I think the other one is about testing. So really, we don't have a lot of open PRs. So if that's good for the group, I'll note that down. And Dimitri, you and Igor, I'd recommend. I think you've posted about this in Zulip before, but maybe start a fresh thread there and just say, this is the conclusion, at least at this milestone 1 stage, and then reach out to the FHIR JS folks for a resolution over time. Does that sound like a good example? So just start a Zulip thread so we can let people know that this is the approach we're taking.
Yeah, also I created an issue on GitHub. Feel free to look.
Yeah, I also don't know much about the JS implementation of FHIR. The only thing is that I think it makes sense. And then, the reference implementation with JavaScript may fail that test. That's fine. So in that column, it would just fail for that. And then we have an attached bug for it. This is good because then the other implementations do the right thing and they don't inherit the same bug that the JS version.
How does that sound to folks? And I think you had a similar point in the past, if I'm not mistaken, about having, sort of exception.
Yeah, I have similar problems, especially with that boundary test. I don't remember whether it was exactly the same thing that is being discussed here, this issue or not. But I had some. I was getting something from FHIR, but it was not matching the expectation. It's just something like that.
And that sounds like a good approach to me, and it highlights this problem. Sort of directs people to think about it. So I think it's in some way to acknowledge the fact that this is a known issue is useful and not like an actual error, something like that. I think taking that on, I don't think we had a resolution to that exception idea, if I'm remembering correctly, in the past couple of weeks. But I think that should probably be a to-do for us. I don't think it has to be right now, but some track that idea. I think let's check if it is tracked actually in issues. I don't know if you added a issue for that, but I would suggest we do that because we talked about that as a feature of the test framework. Does that sound good?
Yeah, I think I saw some people using a reason field if it does fail. So that kind of is an exception, but it might not be like you could put reason past, and then it's not really an exception. It just has a reason. So something to explore in there as well.
Yeah, maybe there's no actual change to the test framework that's necessary, and maybe just filling in a reason field is appropriate. But I'm just suggesting, Bashir, that you just track that down and take a look at that, whatever the reason field or any modifications we want to make to demonstrate those exceptions. Does that sound good?
Yeah, that was kind of the idea for adding the reason field
Okay.
to this. I added it, and in my test, I just said skip. But that was the idea that you can per test that you don't pass, you can have something saying that why this is not passed.
Okay, so it seems like we have the feature we need already, or at least a reasonable approximation of it. Would you say that?
Just reference the GitHub. Yeah, we can just reference a GitHub issue or something like that. Yeah.
Okay. Then it seems I thought we had nothing, but if we do have something, then it seems like there's really no next step here for me, at least.
Well, I guess the action item is just to update the tests to make sure that the expectation is based on what is in FHIR specification, not what is implemented in the JS version.
And that's is that across all of the, is this an issue for all of the implementations, or is it mostly an issue with just the reference implementation, or who needs to know that, basically?
Yeah. For us, I know that our implementation, I have actually skipped those. Some of the boundary tests, I have skipped them. Again, I need to look into see exactly what were the problems, but I had some problems with boundary tests, and
same for me. I look back at that because it's kind of tricky in general.
Okay, so I think that's I'm just thinking how we can materialize that into a to-do. So I think notify implementers that they should be looking at their according to the FHIR specification, have their tests be read, have a reason in the reason field. Does that sound right?
All the unit tests that we use should be off the spec. Is that what you?
Yeah. So I can write that in the to-dos, and hopefully the implementers, we don't have 50 implementers, but so we can just bug the ones who are not up to snuff.
By the way, who is responsible for that dashboard, like the implementation dashboard? Because one other thing, I should have probably done that. Yeah, there was no reason that I didn't do that. So when I added the reason, so maybe for the tests that fail, maybe with a hover or something, you can show the reason, such that that because that is not exposed in that dashboard, that implementation dashboard. So we can easily expose that as well.
Yeah, that's great. That is a to-do. It was Nikolai, I believe, who wrote that, but I'm not sure. But I'll mark that as to-do where so that the dashboard has some
Exposes the
way
reason.
exposes the
Exposes the
reason
reason.
somehow. Yeah, okay. Dashboard reason. Maybe there's like an asterisk after it if there's something in the reason field, and then you can hover over it to see the description. Like that. Okay, wait, right, and hover. All right. Next up, I think that's it for at least some of the higher level items for the outstanding items. So for today, I did post a milestone 1 review sheet, really simple. Feel free to edit it, take a look at it. Should be pretty self-explanatory. I put a couple names down and just had a couple of columns put there, but feel free to talk about any adjustments you want to see there. Next up, so I'm going to skip over the Parquet stuff for now. Let's talk about the Connectathon. So we do have a room on Sunday afternoon for the summit, so that'll be fun. I'm not sure who. I know that Alex is going, Evan should be there, or at Dallas. A couple of their folks are going to be there. Dan will be there. Graham will be there. So we'll keep advertising that. So it's Sunday afternoon, and then of course we should be advertising and marketing SQL on FHIR and that session to other folks during the rest of the Connectathon. Any other items about the Connectathon? I was just thinking, I don't think we have a table in the big room, or we can totally play it by ear. But if there's anything, I wanted to know if anyone was thinking of, this is the thing we have to do at the Connectathon. Ryan, are you going to be there?
No, unfortunately, I have a personal conflict this weekend, so I'm not able to travel. But yeah, wish I could. I'll be at Dev Days though for folks that are able to make that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, any thoughts from the group on, some specific items that we would like to take on at the Connectathon?
And we could continue a conversation on RK, on our implementations, or we could talk about the boundary stuff or what to do about extensions. I think Evan might want to talk about that. Like if a view definition has an extension.
Yeah, I think John isn't going to be there, so we're not getting the full group. I think, unfortunately, Dan and Josh are in other sessions too, so we might not have enough of the team together to really take on some of that work, or say, okay, this is definitely the specific deliverable. But I wanted to think. I mean, we could honestly use it as a working session through some of the issues that are there. Sometimes we do that, obviously for the marketing aspects too. So those are the two things I had in mind. But anything else from the group on the Connectathon? I will try very hard to. So I'm going to record the Sunday session for folks who can't be there, and I'm going to try and live stream it too, same Zoom link. So if you are available on Sunday for those 2 hours or so, hopefully it'll be able to be interactive. So that's the idea. So hopefully that'll come off. All right, so Connectathon. So moving along, one thing we were talking about not last week, the week before, was what's left really for milestone 1 release. I think for us, it was general consensus was there's definitely some more editorial work to do. I think some more passes on the editorial stuff, some more eyes for reviewing the spec, cleaning up some of the outstanding items, PRs and issues. But over and above that, is there any specific items people have in mind outside of that list for milestone 1? And I'll maybe formalize that a little bit more into a more structured punch list for milestone 1.
Yeah, I think if I remember correctly, there was one more unit test that wasn't matching the FHIR spec. I'll have to see what it is, but something about string join. It returned an empty string rather than null. So I guess just going through the unit tests again to make sure they all match spec. That might be wrapped in the go over GitHub issues stuff.
So narrative, edits, test cleanup, issues, PRs. I think this is actually probably a good agenda item for the Connectathon. And we'll have some folks here, but hopefully we can get everybody just locking down what that list is. Probably a good action item. So then we can just go through it relatively rapidly afterwards.
Yeah, it might be interesting to label issues of what we might consider as a blocker for a 1.0 release. I mean, I'm just kind of browsing through the issues now, and there's some of them that are sort of more questions, or maybe things that I would argue we should consider for a subsequent release, but not in 1.0, and maybe just label, and label what. Yeah, I don't think our goal should be remove all issues. We're going to have a continued set of questions there. But I mean, but Arjun, I agree with your sentiment. I feel there's probably some more editing and clarifications and that sort of thing that needs to go in. Otherwise, I mean, and of course, the test issues that were enumerated there or discussed earlier, follow up on those. I mean, folks, I'd like to hear if you'd agree with that. I feel like feature-wise, I feel like what we have there, I would argue, is pretty much feature complete for 1.0. But if folks disagree with that, that's probably something that we want to kind of work through sooner than later. But hopefully we can do the burn down list. And I don't know, it'd be awesome to have like a 1.0 but ahead of Dev Days. That'd be cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And this was our target, right? And so I feel good that we were like tracking very well to it, right? So that's great. Yeah, and actually like kind of being in person is actually a good forum for this kind of discussion. It's kind of going through and saying, okay, well, here's the line. So yeah, completely agree. What we should do is or just curate, like going through a lot of issues and just sort of curating them and splitting them into categories. It's really a lot more efficient that way. Plus you have, folks, and so you can have, multiple voices in the room on that. It's not just one person alone doing it. So I will make that as a note to curate through the issues, categorize them between what there's a consensus, this is a blocker versus a non-blocker. I don't get a sense that there was one thing that came up recently, but I think there's a general consensus that there's no real feature additions. We think that there's a strong argument for feature additions or major changes at this stage. But that should go out to the whole group and get everybody's sense.
Sounds good.
Great. And the last item, which actually is interesting, this came from last week, and I think there's a little bit more commentary about it this week, which is, we're talking about how in NCP we're thinking about using data requirements, right, to sort of slim down FHIR resources to a set below the profile. Alex, I can hand it over to you to think about that or to discuss that with the group. If you want to learn more about this use case that we have. And there was a suggestion there because in data requirements, there's limit and sort too. So let me hand it over to Alex to talk about this use case.
Are you referring to what Evan said for an issue? He was thinking about, right now we don't have specific row ordering in place. You can have your rows in various orders, which I kind of enjoy because you can implement, a little more normalization where you don't have to sort things and you can run things all at the same time. But he was saying he would like a sort by column where you pre-sort the data before it goes into an SQL or into a database. I haven't thought about it very much, but I don't know how your implementations work and how much work it would be to add that sorting and how much that would affect performance. It didn't really come from me, it was more from him. So maybe at the conference he can say his use case more. But personally, it could run into performance issues where you already, but I don't really know without profiling.
I just want to say this is not like some official position of NSQA or anything like that. It's an idea that we have based on this use case about using data requirements and, in theory, sampling, that we want to be more stable. That's my interpretation. So I'm seeing this for the first time too. So I just wanted to point that out. We also have other use cases as well. So this is not the only one here.
So just to make sure that I understand the kind of the suggestion. So this is in the context of a single resource, right? Yeah, because let's say if I have 1,000 patient resources and I apply a view definition on that, I may get like 5,000 rows, on average 5 rows per resource. So I suppose, if it's talking about, the context of necessity printing, and I think that's outside the scope of view definition, in my opinion. But if it's in the scope of one single row, what I'm trying to get is that, the context for a view definition is one resource and it should be kept that. And then in that context, sorting is not that important. So let's leave that out as a feature. And then, if people want to do sorting, they probably care about the whole table, the 5,000 rows. And they can use just normal like SQL or whatever query engine they are using. It has some sorting capability to use that. So basically what I'm trying to suggest is to leave that issue out of view definition in general.
Yeah, that's a great clarification. I'm not sure which one he meant, to be honest. But the per resource wouldn't introduce as many issues for me, but I see what you mean for like all of the 5,000 rows. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's easy to implement that if it's per resource. But then I'm not sure if it's that useful.
Right.
Yeah,
and I think I think I definitely agree with Bashir's sentiment, and there may be other systems specific ways to achieve that as well. If and when we get to the point where we define like an operation on a FHIR server to get to materialize a view definition, maybe that's a sort order by and limit our parameters on that operation, which makes a lot more sense to me because those are the order bind limit are something that might flex a lot at runtime, whereas the view definition should be a pretty static resource. So yeah, I see a couple thumbs up. So maybe I'll just respond to that sentiment to the GitHub issue because I just came across it poking around there.
Yeah, I was looking at Zulip to see, where it was, but it was in a GitHub issue. But I think that highlights something about the narrative potentially. And I'm thinking, is it something that we want to highlight a little more strongly in the narrative that the data context, the view definition C is one resource at a time. The table, right? It doesn't see the output. It's scoped to that. And that's the boundary. And I wonder if in our narrative we, not necessarily on purpose or this wasn't sort of an error I think on our part, but like because we're talking about sort of the end-to-end use cases sometimes here, right? Showing them that might get lost. So what's the group's thought about that?
No, I think, yeah, that's actually, so because that also is within the resource. Like, I mean, that's a reference, like, when you get the subject of an observation, it's within the resource. So, and I think, I also don't remember whether this has been clarified. I mean, Ryan probably knows best, whether it's clarified in the text of view definition or not. But to me, it's actually, it's an important feature of view definition. That it is, I mean, I think when we were discussing join, that was one of the issues I think that we were discussing, that we shouldn't try to go beyond the scope of one resource. And this applies both for different resource types, but I would say it also applies even the same type but different resources. It's an important feature because you will get significantly different scalability features. If you have view limit, you make sure that the view definition scope is just a single resource. So I think it's worth being emphasized actually.
Got it.
Yeah.
Ryan, thoughts on that?
Yeah, totally agrry. And yeah, so I think this is so I'm actually like in the spirit of like starting to track our burn down list in GitHub. I actually started while you're chatting about that, I started typing up a GitHub issue. So I'm gonna log a GitHub issue, will be sort of a placeholder. I'm kind of like framing this as like we should be very clear about what the non-goals are for a view definition, and so like which includes a lot of those properties. And so I think by being explicit about that could help. So I'm trying to capture a couple of those. I'll actually let me just go ahead and log this issue, and we can add items to an issue discussion. So yeah, I'll go ahead and do that, and I'll ping a link to this chat. Just 1 second here.
You can look at a view definition and think in the tabular context, right? Like it's a really, I think, easy thing to do. And then I'm just looking at the ticket again. Like data requirements are clearly in the like in the opposite context, in the collection context, right? And so because they have sort and limit, things like that. So like sort is basically meaningless when it comes to view definitions. Not modular what said, but you know what I mean. Like it's essentially you're looking at one specific concrete resource here and applying something to it. And so what are you sorting, right? Exactly. So, and what are you limiting, right? So, okay. Yeah, I've certainly had experiences talking about this a little bit to a couple of folks, and this kind of confusion about the data environment that view definitions are working in certainly has come up.
Yeah, I think it's very common that people, especially with some of the background that we talk about in the actual, it's very common. It could be a common mistake that people come to this and feel that like view definition is like SQL in JSON, in FHIR language, which is to some extent it is, but it's also important, it's not the end of the story. So it's very, very focused on one single resource, no joins, no cross resource thing. And then, you can use this as a building block to build your SQL, basically. I mean, your bigger SQL.
Yeah, that sounds good. And this is a great example of like, now that people are starting to think about real world implementations, not that we haven't, but, really starting to use view definitions and SQL and FHIR v2 as like a component of a real system with different concerns. I think this is really great sort of empirical adjustments to the specification. So good to see that.
And I think the naming, by the way, is actually great. Like, view definition. So that's exactly how we use it. Like, I mean, you use the view definition to create a view, and then you build your downstream SQLs on top of it. We should emphasize more, if this is not emphasized enough, that this has been the thinking behind creation of view definition.
Yeah.
Great. Awesome. Yeah, glad I brought it up. So that's, I think, all I had. Oh, going back to the last week's Parquet session. So we've covered a lot of ground, but like I said, I actually haven't had a chance to go through it and in detail and document it, but I did a little bit before this meeting. My thoughts were about takeaways from that were, so John talked about having some homework out of that to try to see what the feasibility of a lossless transformation from Parquet to FHIR was. That was one takeaway that I got from it. I wasn't clear. I haven't gone back to the video just to hear if we thought that there were, potentially some other avenues there and start to think about sort of the loss. Like I see it as a sort of a continuum here. So like the maximum lossless transformation and then sets of trade-offs. I wasn't sure if anybody, raised their hand to work on that, looking at those reasonable trade-offs, but that was definitely something that came up. And then the other takeaway I had was we wanted to set up sort of a show and tell style session to go through in detail how folks have approached the Parquet mapping issue in the past. We talked about them in the abstract a couple, different ways, but it's pretty hard to get your head around some of the approaches, particularly when they get a little bit more complicated into extensions and things like that. So people have taken different choices. So those are the two I had. I wanted to ask if anybody recalls or had notes on, like, I'm just collecting it for, sort of administrative purposes at this point this year.
So I just made like a suggestion in the toward the end of it. Not that we all agree on, but I suggested that we read through that original projection, like SQL projection document that Ryan wrote, and it's still on the old version of, and use that as a starting point. That's my suggestion. Because I think both Pathling implementation and our implementation are based on that, with many modifications and divergence. But the basis I think is the same thing. And then I think another, for that show and tell type of meeting, I guess another action item is we pick one. Let's say we pick patient resource, for example, and we actually before the meeting we share the actual Parquet scheme for that resource. Let's say patient or US core patient, something like that, to cover the extension as well. And then once we have those concrete, I am hoping and I'm guessing that maybe like more than 80% is the same. Like you get basically the same projection between different implemented, between those who have done already projection, and then we can just focus on the 20%.
The differences. Yeah, that sounds really good. So let me just play that back to you. So for folks who have done Parquet implementations, and I think there are probably some other ones out there that we haven't thought of. I might go and, if you know of some out in the wild, go and talk to those folks. I think I know of one that I can talk to. Hopefully could be a part of this. Yeah, I like this idea, take a sampling, right? Patient, US core patient, probably, good example. Send them around. I don't think they're super proprietary for anybody. At least, folks won't share it if they are. It probably shouldn't be. I mean, it's pretty much just it's a mapping of a public specification, right, to another public specification. So there's probably not a lot of, trade secret possibilities. Then, yeah, share that around. Have people read them. And this, I think, would be helpful. Like, I've seen some Parquet, but not delved into Parquet schemas in detail. So share it around before the meeting, do an analysis on what the commonalities are, what the differences are. I think this is great and really very empirical. So yeah, I think it's a great suggestion. I've noted that down. So prepare a little bit for this session, right? Have some homework for everyone, some folks who have implementations, some folks who want to read into this. So yeah, I like it. Great. Any thoughts from the group on that approach for our next round? And this probably should become its own sort of sub work stream. We've talked about in the past. It doesn't necessarily have to be the major work stream. Probably don't need anything too fancy in terms of organizational structure at this point, unless somebody disagrees. That's just my gut feeling. We can sort of continue use the weekly, because these Parquet implementations are not going to, they're not going to be next month, right? So, and then use those weekly meetings for these types of sessions. They're ad hoc, like, the week in advance or something, like we can say, okay, we're having another one. How does that sound, folks, overall and in detail?
But I think, and I saw, recently I was looking at the bulk data stream on chat, and I saw actually he has, back then, like 4 years ago, there has been some conversation in that stream on Parquet. I don't know if him or someone else from that team still is working on supporting like Parquet. I guess the suggestion there was to add Parquet as a format for bulk data, but in general, I mean, this is the same idea. Generating Parquet is useful for analytics, basically. So
Right.
that's one other major implementation. If they are still working on it, it would be nice to reach out and have someone from their group also be here.
Yep, sounds good. Since you raised it, I'm gonna give the to-do to you, Bashir, to go and try to track them down. Go next. But that the last thing you saw was from 4 years ago in the bulk track, not recently.
Yes, no, not recently. Yeah, I'll check the person and then I'll see if they are still, working. I can also ping the person and see if they respond.
Yeah.
On chat. Yeah.
Okay, that sounds good. And just let us know. I know IBM still is developing their FHIR server, right? Pretty active. I think last year I heard somebody was looking at it, in terms of using it. So yeah, ping them. Let's see where they're at. I can think of one more. Also, he hasn't been on the call, but Aaron from Databricks too. They have, it's not, I don't know, but he would be interested in this conversation. I think he might have missed out last, but let me just make a to-do for myself to at least inform Aaron of what's going on from Databricks. Okay, I think we've got about 10 minutes to spare. So that sounds good for next steps on Parquet to me. Anything else on Parquet or just the broader approach, Connectathon, anything? Just open it up.
I think I remember from last meeting, there was some file on, I don't know who did it, but the mapping of the types for Parquet. Do you know where that file is? Or who shared that? Like it was on GitHub. They said, for date types, I used this in Parquet. For this, I used that in Parquet. Maybe I'm making.
Yeah, I don't remember exactly who that person might have been, but we have, I guess everybody who does this, they have something. I can share like a GitHub link with you. Well, the way that we do it is a little bit indirect. So we go to Avro first and then from Parquet. I can show you what we use for Avro, and then, Avro to Parquet is also kind of.
Yeah, certainly. I'm mostly just thinking about how you guys do dates and date times, because originally I just used a timestamp, but then that doesn't go before 1970, which is an issue. So anyway, just this detail of the implementation I was wondering about.
Oh, right.
Sure.
Unix timestamp.
Yeah, or I had some limit that I needed to go past or something.
Yeah, what was I going to say? It probably was John. So I would say, Alex, reach out to John.
Okay. Cool, thank you.
Yeah, or if you create like I think we can also, I can share ours as well, and then we can actually.
Yeah, that's even better. So I'm going to say, Alex, create Zulip chat on this topic and just ping John.
By the way, I'm curious, are you actually implementing FHIR to Parquet, or are you new definition results to Parquet?
I have my own internal representation of like a data table, and I just map that to Parquet, but it's pretty much the same. Yeah, FHIR to Parquet.
So full FHIR resource being represented in Parquet, right?
Yeah, using the view definitions. I don't have the general, I'm not trying to take all of FHIR and put it in Parquet. I have, yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah, sounds great to see all this progress. And yeah, it's excited for, what's up next, Connectathon, and we'll have a milestone I think we can feel really good about in, not too short order. So that's exciting. So, good work, everyone in the team. Anything else before we close? All right. So hopefully see some of you guys, you Ryan and Bashir, but other folks on the call in Dallas this weekend. And then, we'll go from there. And definitely check, we'll let you know about the live streaming and recording.
Excellent. Thank you.
All right.